Hi there. I'm Caroline Woolley of Meaden and Moore Forensic Accountants. I look after the London office. You may have seen some of my video interviews already. This interview series is called Business Interruption and Other Stories. And I'm interviewing people that I've met over the last 20 odd years. People that I think will be of interest to you and of interest to our clients. And I've been saving this one to kick us off this year. And I've got the pleasure of interviewing Gordon Roesler. And for those of us who love the space industry and everything to do with it, this is a real treat. I met Gordon a number of years ago working on a non-damage business interruption project when I was at Marsh. And I was working with the wonderful Yamin at Marsh, who heads up the space team. And Gordon at that time was working for DARPA, which is the Defense Advancement Research Projects Agency, which is run by the US government, looking at investments in national security, among other things. And Gordon now works for himself and he's a consultant, and his company is called Robots in Space, which is just an amazing title. So I will let Gordon in and he can introduce himself and what he's doing now. And here he is. Here's Gordon. Gordon Roesler, hi, thank you very much for joining me.
Hi, Caroline. Yeah, thank you for asking me.
I've just done a very brief introduction about when we first met a number of years ago on that project, and that you're now working for your consultancy business called Robots in Space, which is just for us is just amazing. It sounds like a sci-fi movie, but this is actually your reality. And it's, you know, I know when we met at the time, you were working at DARPA. I was just explaining briefly about DARPA, and the project that we were working on was in relation to basically robots servicing satellites in space. And at that point, we were looking at helping the project from an insurance perspective to help the investment. And we'll go into that in a bit more detail. But I thought initially we could just start off with looking at what you're doing now and, you know, what the latest position is in relation to the using robots to service satellites in space.
So let's go back 20 years. Which is when I first started working in this area of, you know, helping satellites to be more robust by sending something up and working on them. You know, if a company was going to build a large, expensive thing like a building, a multi-story building, an airplane, a ship, you would naturally expect that it was going to be inspected and maintained properly and serviced if things went wrong and upgraded. And just, you know, in the course of doing business, that's just part of it. It's inconceivable that you wouldn't do those things to keep the property value up and that sort of thing. We have never been able to do that with satellites. Right, we would launch a satellite and it's out there on orbit and it is alone and unafraid. There's never been any inspecting, any maintaining, any repairing, any upgrading. So 20 years ago, I started working on what can we do about that. And most people, when they think about space, they think about astronauts. They think about humans out there. But many of the satellites that are very useful here on Earth are inaccessible to astronauts. They're too far away and the radiation levels are too high and so forth. So this has to be done with robots. And so we started way back in 2002 working on, you know, what can robots do, even for satellites that weren't specially designed to be repaired or to be inspected or whatever. And that technology work proceeded for 15 years. By the time you and I met, We had space qualified robot arms ready to go. We had the software and the algorithms and all these sorts of things ready to be built into a robot repairman. Look, that looks nothing like a human, but it has these capabilities of inspecting and repairing in limited ways and putting new things on satellites and even moving the satellites around. So that was my life for almost 20 years, and now it's actually happening. The technology is ready, and companies are actually out there doing it.
Well, I know that there's a lot of investment in these projects, and there's obviously a lot of planning that goes in, and there are sometimes some hiccups along the way. And I've heard in some of the other interviews that you've done that you mention about the importance of commercial investment in these projects as well as government subsidies. And you were talking about investor confidence, and that it's vital to support the project, but also to support growth in the industry. But with these, it's about the investor confidence, and I think insurance can play a part in that. And when we look at the overall risks that are faced in these projects, I mean, obviously they're immense, and there's lots of different risks, but some of them are insurable. And I mean, that's why we met, of course, because you were doing the presentation to the market. And the investors felt that a bit more confident because more things can be insured.
So there's two aspects to this. Before we really get into that, I want to just show your audience a couple of pictures. I wrote an article in the European Space Journal 3 years ago. It's called "Preparing for the Robot Revolution in Earth Orbit."
Right.
Okay, so that was just after I started my robots and space consulting company. But the specific project that you and I met on was this robot repairman, which I'll try to get very close to the screen.
Oh yeah, we can see.
So on the left is a robotic satellite, and on the right is a regular communications satellite, and one of its solar panels hasn't unfolded properly. You can see it looks like an accordion there.
Yeah.
And so the robot repairman is going to attempt to push on that and get it to deploy properly. Talk about insurance. There was recently a satellite from the company Viasat. Very, very powerful, capable satellite. One of its antennas didn't deploy properly. So the spacecraft was only able to serve 2/3 of the customer demand. Right. And the insurance payout for that was $188 million. And so if you had a robot repair vehicle like this, it might have been possible to push that antenna out properly and mitigate that loss, right? So this is the promise. This is the thing. Of course, these robots themselves are very complicated objects, and they can experience failures, I suppose, at some point, and they just wear out or whatever. So there's the whole question of insuring the robots as well as the benefits that they bring to insuring the rest of the spacecraft that are out there operating. Let's see. That was a part of your question.
Yeah, and I mean, the reason why I was involved from a business interruption perspective, what you were talking about in terms of the actual projects and satellites themselves, and the robotic arm, the robots enabling insurance, actually, insurance mitigation. And I think there's a path for business interruption insurance for the satellites as well as a result, because you're suddenly able to mitigate your loss. But then the part that I was looking at specifically was the supply chain in terms of, the making of the various parts. Because at the end of the day, that's really a normal manufacturing list and risk until
during yes. During COVID, we have had, the space industry around the world has had significant problems with supply chain. I mean, microchips, specialized materials, machine parts, because people can't come in because of COVID and all these sorts of things. So the supply chain has been really seriously disrupted. But this can happen. I mean, really, it only takes one part to delay a spacecraft, meeting its launch date, whether it's a fuel tank or a camera or these kind of things.
And as I said, so for us sort of outside of the space industry, that's a relatively normal risk. It's heightened during times like COVID, but that supply chain risk is one that is faced, and it's more like a normal manufacturing risk. But so that's the part that we were looking at, was to try and help the investors feel confident that as much as possible is insured. And so we were looking at the non-damage business interruption risk in that supply chain. And the investors obviously just want to as much to be insured as possible. So that's why we were exploring that area. But I suppose in this case, and I'll definitely ask you to explain it rather than me, but it's time critical, isn't it, in terms of getting satellites into space, into a certain orbit, very time critical. So that's where it's the risk.
For many reasons. One of them is that you contract with a launch company to launch your spacecraft and get it out there. And if you miss that window by, there's some flexibility, but they're going to go look for another ride. They're going to look for someone else to go up with them. So that's a risk. That can set you back, because they're not making money if they're not launching. The other one is, and it was the one we were talking about earlier, the International Telecommunications Union gives away these spots around the Earth where the satellites are. They license them for a limited period of time. If your satellite is not in that slot transmitting, they will give the slot to someone else, because those things are incredibly valuable. Hundreds of millions of dollars a year per slot are generated in terms of data transmission revenues. Whether it's financial exchange or television signals or radio or whatever, the value of those slots is enormous, and they're not going to. The International Telecommunications Unit is not going to allow people to license a slot and not use it. That's not okay.
So for us, it's so interesting to hear how this works, because it is like old-fashioned climbing the mountain and putting your flag in the mountain to say that that's yours, that's your area. And so they have to do the same thing. They have to actually transmit from that part of orbit for it actually to be valid and for them to continue. So yeah, there's as you say, there's a number of time critical parts to this. So you can't really have too much business interruption in your project because of that, because of it being time critical. So yeah, we were looking at that, and I find that obviously very interesting, and it's useful to explain it in that way so people can understand. But there are a number of risks, obviously, and they're not all insurable. I was saying about once it's up and in orbit, there's a lot of room for development in terms of business interruption insurance. But even in the supply chain, again, not all areas are insurable. And this is something that we were looking at, and it's still ongoing. There are a number of different insurance policies out there that will insure non-damage business interruption, but typically it still focuses on physical damage. And interesting, you were saying the picture that you had, because I know that was used as an example previously, where it's just unbelievable. As you said, there's so much money invested, and then this thing will go up into space and one of the arrays won't come, solar arrays won't come out. And then it's just sort of, you've got to write it off. You've got no comeback. You've got no potential mitigation there. And the physical damage, it's just if it's a write-off, then as you say, there's hundreds of millions of pounds and dollars given it from an insurance perspective. So it's a real enabler. This project is so exciting. We were looking at refueling, wasn't it, as well, and servicing of the satellites. And again,
you can even add new things to a satellite after it gets on orbit. You can bring a box and put it on and give it a new capability that it didn't have when it was launched. Or we're looking at, are there ways to upgrade the capabilities you do have to make them flexible to meet new customer demands and that sort of thing. So we're, think about a satellite that is built more like Legos, where you put things together and you can take a piece off and put another piece on and that sort of thing. So that's still developmental, but there's good development going on in that area. And someday that's going to be more normal than the satellites that we have today, where everything is tightly integrated together in a single package, and you'd have to be a surgeon to get in there and do anything about it. So that's some of the future stuff that's coming.
And so in terms of the sort of useful economic life of a satellite, and that was again another interesting fact when we were working on the project, was about the limited life of a satellite, partly because of the fuel.
No gas stations, right? Yet up there, but there is a company that's doing something about that. Northrop Grumman in the United States has 2 satellites in geostationary orbit. They have attached to their clients, and they use their own rockets in order to keep the satellite in its proper place. And so that extends its life, because it was about to run out of gas. When you run out of gas, you have to put them up in a safe disposal orbit, and they're done at that point. But these 2 spacecraft, one of which started operating in 2019 and the other in 2020, have proved to the whole space community that this isn't science fiction anymore. You said science fiction at the beginning, but there are 2 spacecraft whose lives are being extended right now by these Northrop Grumman mission extension vehicles. And they're working on the next generation of those right now. But Intelsat is the customer, and they're paying some amount of money per year to have the lives of these 2 spacecraft extended. Steve Spangler is the CEO of Intelsat, and he says, if I have a satellite that's making money, why would I want to throw it away?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So that's happening.
You can extend the life, as you say, either by updating and the refueling and the extension of the life, but also, as you say, servicing and fixing as you go through. It's very rare that anything is going to go completely smoothly and not have anything go wrong in its full useful economic life. So yeah, to be able to extend that is amazing, and to update as you go as well. And you mentioned about, if things go wrong, having to move the satellite safely out of the way to the junkyard orbit. I'm just trying to remember where does it go when it's considered?
So, yeah, most of the satellites that are generating big economic returns right now. Now this is aside from the large constellations near the Earth, like Elon Musk's Starlink and the OneWeb satellites, that sort of thing. But the ones that take the weather photographs, the ones that transmit television to you, the ones that are used for electronic data interchange between financial institutions, these are out in this one orbit called geostationary orbit, which the orbit goes around the Earth at the same rate that the Earth rotates. So from the Earth, the satellite looks like it's always in the same place. That's why the little dishes that you see on the houses don't have to rotate, right? Because that satellite is always in the same place. So there's about 300 commercial satellites in that orbit. The value of the bits that goes out to that orbit and comes back last year was about $100 billion. Wow. So it's a money-making location.
Yeah.
If one of those satellites is at the end of life, you push it out 300 kilometers to what we call a graveyard. It's a disposal orbit. It's too far from the Earth to bring it back down and have it burn up in the atmosphere, which is what we do with the closer ones.
Yeah.
So there's this junkyard out there, and some people are even looking at, can we go harvest those old satellites and reuse some of the parts, or grind down the aluminum and make new structures with them.
That would be amazing, because everyone's talking about sustainability, and absolutely anything that can be done to reuse and recycle, and but just before it's sent out there, even as you said, to extend its life and use it as much as possible, because you don't want to have to start again and send a whole new one up. It's going to be cheaper to repair and extend the life.
And then beyond that, we have the idea of assembling things in space. So I think many people are aware of the James Webb Space Telescope, which is NASA and ESA, huge object, 18 mirrors that are 6 meters across the whole thing. And there's a sun shield below them that's the size of a tennis court. Very complex. It's on orbit, it's safely deployed. They're adjusting the mirrors right now, and in a few months we'll have pictures of some of the most distant objects we've ever seen. But there was a lot of nail biting when that was launched, because it's so complex. It's all one thing and one rocket going up there. And if the rocket has a failure, or if something doesn't fold out properly, it's useless. Just like you were talking about that solar panel, this could happen with this $9 billion telescope. So the next one, the one after James Webb, we're starting to look at, can you assemble it from parts in orbit, so that if you have a launch failure or one of the parts doesn't work, you can replace that, but you haven't lost the whole apparatus. Wow. NASA did a big study that I was a part of to see how practical that is, and we think it's a winner. We think that's the way the next big telescope needs to be developed.
Again, the parts. Assembling the parts, much like I've been doing with my son. Our wacky vehicles that we make out of Lego are nothing in comparison. Actually, though, I remember bringing in a photo of a rocket that my daughter had made out of cardboard as a school project. And I brought it in and I promised her that I would show people. And I think you were one of the ones that were very complimentary of my daughter's rocket that she'd made. But it was pink, and it was, but hey, she was very proud that someone from DARPA had actually seen her design. She was very, very pleased.
I do hope her career in aerospace engineering is continuing.
I am so encouraging it, very much so. Yeah, it's such an exciting industry, and for most of us, it's just such a pleasure. And I mean, I could speak to you about this all night and carry on, but I do want to just look at one. I've got one other question, but it was just looking back to this project that we were looking at, and non-damage business interruption risk was one of the, it was the insurance that we were looking at for the project itself. And it was looking at supply chain, as I said, and when we were talking, you were actually interested in business interruption risk, and at the time, particularly cyber risk. Now, I don't know if your views changed with, coronavirus and infectious disease, or if that's actually affected the industry as much or at all, other than supply chain, as you said. But, what risks are top of the list, and is cyber and cyber security still high on that list?
I think it is. I mean, granted, the perturbations that we've had the hoops that we've had to jump through with the coronavirus, the industry has been remarkably resilient in, getting workers to come in at different times to minimize the number of people on the floor, but still able to assemble the spacecraft and that sort of thing. So the delays that you might have expected are much shorter than we projected 2 years ago when this all started. So it certainly was a difficult thing, but people really rose to the occasion. Cyber is never like that. The cyber defender is always playing catch up, right? The attacker finds new things, and only in retrospect can the defender really do something about it. So there's and you might say, well, satellites are far away, but we still have the possibility of insiders putting malicious code in before the thing is launched. We still have the possibility of people, hacking into the telemetry and command network in order to get the thing to do things we don't want it to do. So I would still say that, especially as satellites get more complex missions. I mean, most of the satellites that are out there in geosynchronous orbit are just, you might think of them as reflectors, right? They get a signal in, they add power to it, they send it back down, and millions of people can get the signal. But there's not much you could really do to interrupt that with hacking. But a robot, right, in space, somebody said to me one time, as a white hat hacker said to me, every hacker on the planet is going to try to get into your robot because it's so cool. They want to take control. So we've had to be, pretty thoughtful about that. I would say that's still really, really high on the list. But launch failures, we historically launches fail about 2% of the time, and if we want to get away from the cost impacts of that, what we need to do is make these satellites more modular, so that if a rocket does fail, we only lose part of it and not the whole thing.
Yeah, and now there's risks everywhere with these things, but from our perspective, for us in the insurance industry, we just hope that it feels good that the insurance industry can help these projects as an enabler. Insurance is an enabler for research and development projects to help protect the investors, so the investors feel more comfortable, as we were saying earlier.
And I should be clear, it is a growth industry. I mean, there are more new innovative projects being created now, and the money that's pouring into it, the private investment that's pouring into space, is going up exponentially. It really is something. So there'll be more opportunities for insurance to participate in these things. I should also mention, you talk about space debris and keeping space sustainable, that sort of thing. And so this is one thing that these robots can help with, by just taking pieces of debris and getting rid of them. But another is that when we talk about climate change, 90% of what we know about the Earth's climate comes from satellite data. So keeping this industry healthy, and finding ways to make it more robust and be able to collect more data and make better decisions about how to mitigate these things is an important responsibility that we have, and insurers can help. And more of this stuff is being done commercially, right? It used to be that almost every satellite was government satellite. Now it's much less so, and weather data and climate data are being collected by private space companies as well as governments.
And I know that obviously at the time of the project you were working for DARPA, but you've always encouraged the combination of the commercial investment to keep things on track, and as well as the working alongside the government. So yeah, it's fantastic that insurance can play a small part in helping this. But it's by far for me, my favorite industry. And I definitely,
Mine too.
Yeah, and you know, I've got this small part to play, but I definitely want to continue with this and help where possible, even in a tiny way. And you know, we've been talking about coronavirus, and I'm just testing negative today, but I've had it myself, so excuse the snuffles, and I've got the aspirin here to try and make myself feel a bit better. But I definitely I wanted to use this opportunity to speak to you, because it's it really is an honor and a pleasure to speak to you, and I really appreciate your time, taking time out to speak to us and to share your insights and your views. But I will continue to keep watch and continue to follow you on LinkedIn and hear your other interviews that you do. And I really hope that at some stage we get to the opportunity to work together again. I work pre-loss as well as post-loss, so it's a lot of claims work that I work with now. So Meaden and Moore investigate claims on behalf of insurers, but we also use our expertise up front in relation to setting values and getting insurance policies right. So we're working a lot with the insurers in that way. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to work together again.
I hope so too. I help a lot of small startup companies just pro bono in order to get their heads straight and understand, you know, space markets and space business and space technology and that sort of thing. And I'm always bringing up the insurance issue, always to these guys. So my talking to you today was partly self-interest, because I think that most people don't have much awareness of what's going on in the space industry, other than the occasional landing on Mars and this sort of thing. But we need more people to be aware, because that way when they can talk to their governments and say, hey, are you supporting this? This is important stuff. And so every chance I get in order to send the message of you know, good things going on in space and good things coming from space to help the Earth. So I appreciate it very much.
And, you know, I think, you know, we will both work with insurers in the development of this area. So, yeah, as I say, we'll hopefully get an opportunity to work with you again. But I really appreciate your time, and it's such an interesting topic.